Hi there everyone, my name is Chee-Wee and I'm a physiotherapist. I'm also an amateur musician. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a reaction video of a bass player doing a song, and we're going to look at some of the elements of how what can be improved in order to prevent future injuries. Now, before I do the reaction video, if you'd like me to make more of such videos in order to help musicians as well as therapists and budding musicians to improve themselves in terms of their posture and to prevent themselves from getting more injuries, do remember to subscribe and also to leave some comments in order for me and tell me what you want, what sort of videos you want me to make. Just something to add is that just because someone has a poor sort of technique or a poor posture does not necessarily mean that they will suffer injuries, definitely. So, but what we are saying is that in order to, if we do correct these incorrect postures, the likelihood of getting an injury becomes lesser. And especially if you're practicing for a long time, this will help immensely to prevent any further injuries in the future. So without further ado, let's have a look at the video. The video that we're looking at is played by this bass player called Anna Santina, and she's done a bass cover of Dua Lipa's song Break My Heart. Okay, so I love the song, so let's have a look at how she does the cover. Nice bass, 5-string bass. Okay, starting off good with the left hand. Good. Oh, wait. Okay, now she started off fairly well with a nice neutral position of the wrist on her left hand. But as the song progresses, what happened is that she started to do a flexion in order to do that angle of the wrist. And so as some of you would know, that this would increase the tension, even though sometimes it helps to play the bass much better, especially on a fingerboard, and as to get some of the notes. But this is, in the long run, is actually not a very good position to be in. But let's have a look again, see whether it's just a small bit of the song or actually she does it throughout the whole song. Had to get it wrong to know just what I like. Now I'm falling. You say my name like I have never heard before. I'm indecisive, but this time I know for sure. I hope I'm not the only. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here for a little while. So, as I said before, on the left hand wrist, she's starting to have that angle. And she doesn't do it all the time, but she does it when she's trying to reach the lower pitch strings, which is the lower strings, like for example on the bass, the E string and the A string. But once she goes up to the D string and the G string, her wrist straightens up again. So it could be that because of the way, and this happens quite a bit, when someone's trying to reach for the lower pitch strings, which is a bit higher, instead of moving her arm in order to reach for the string, what she's done is she's just simply flexed her wrist in order to do that. Well, one way to correct for that is actually to do a lot more arm movement, so that what you do is you prevent doing that acute angle of the wrist. Okay, so that's something that you have to think about. Octaves and melodic chords. Alright, when she's playing the melodic chords, because of the way she angles her fingers to play the melodic chord, she starts to curve a little bit, even for the lower, even for the higher pitch strings, from the D and the G. So what she can do is actually angle her whole arm instead of just curling her wrist. Now, perhaps, I mean, that was on the left hand. Let's look at her right hand. Now on the right hand, she does what a lot of bases actually does. What she does is she has got the base there, and she actually rests her elbow onto the base itself. But it's actually not her elbow, but rather is a bit further on the forearm here. And because of the way she rests her forearm, what she does is she does what a lot of bases do, and that's again have this wrist flexed at an angle in order to do the plucking of the strings right here. So when she does that, you can see that. Now, that happens a lot. What we can do is, in order to prevent this from happening, you can try to actually move your entire shoulder forwards in order to do a sort of a floating angle. You can still rest your thumb on either the pickup, or you can do what some bases do, is to do a floating thumb technique where they actually float there and does that. And I think the bassist Adam Neely, the YouTube bassist and musicologist, he actually does a nice floating thumb sort of playing, which perhaps I can review in another video, but that's what I meant. Okay, so now another thing to avoid as much as possible to rest this bit and putting too much weight and clamping your forearm onto the bass guitar body itself is because there is actually a nerve that runs through here. And if there is too much pressure and too prolonged sort of pressure right here, you'll realize that your fingers, especially your little finger, will become numb, and this bit will become numb. That's because you're starting to hurt your ulnar nerve, which runs along here. So one has to be very careful of that. Okay, let's continue looking at the cover. Now, what I'm observing next is the angle of the bass guitar itself. So what she has done is she has angled. There are several angles to consider here. The very first angle is how the bass guitar body in relation to the fingerboard. Okay, so what she's done is she's done the fingerboard in such a way that it's fairly horizontal with a slight angle, just a very slight. And her left hand technique in terms of preventing the curve can be actually improved if she actually angles the fingerboard of the bass guitar much more acutely. So if, imagine now the fingerboard is right there, like what a lot of classical guitarists do, when she actually starts playing, no matter which position she's in on the bass guitar fingerboard, when she comes down there, and even when she's actually doing the lower pitch strings, like for example, the E, what happens is that the likelihood of her bending her wrist, flexing her wrist like that decreases. So having that angle, but in order to do that, her bass guitar body will need to be a bit lower. If you actually look at her thighs, what it's doing is actually slightly raised. Her right thigh is slightly raised compared to the left thigh. What that means is that she's trying to raise her right thigh to block the to support the bass guitar so that it doesn't actually slide down forwards, and that's quite common. I often do that as well, which is fine. But if you actually do that, what happens is that because the body is raised, the way the bass guitar works in terms of its leverage is that it tends to be that if you raise the body, the fingerboard will tend to turn the other way down, and therefore that increases your wrist angle on the left hand. So that's a bit of an issue. How do you correct that? Well, one simple way is for her to actually sit a bit more forwards. So when she sits forwards, what happens is that both her thighs actually go in a more slope forwards, and now she can actually angle her guitar much more lower, and that allows her to actually tilt her bass guitar in a slightly more acute angle like that, and that will help both, not just the left hand but also the right hand as well, because then both will be actually in a much more extended position, straighter position, in a neutral position. So that's one thing to do. If you find that if the bass guitar, if you do that by sitting forwards and putting the bass guitar on your thighs, it tends to slide downwards. Then something that will help is to actually put on your strap. If you put on your strap, then that will prevent the bass guitar from sliding down, and that frees up your entire body to just concentrate on the plucking and the fingering. Okay, great. Now let's continue with the song to see and observe her other postures. She's got very nice relaxed shoulders, which is great. And her back posture is not bad either. So you can see that she's keeping her back postures fairly straight. One thing she does is that because her bass guitar, she's actually supporting using her thigh. So in order to help with that, she actually tilts her bass guitar backwards and using her body, her thorax to actually block it. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. But one has to be very careful if one does that, because if you actually do it too often, or if it's too heavy or you're using too much strength, what happens is you actually arch your back too much. And if you are playing a long session, sometimes that might actually hurt your back. So just have to be very careful of that. But she's doing fine for the moment. She's in a very relaxed position, which is always good. If you're in a relaxed position, that means that you are enjoying music, but also that the likelihood of you tensing out your muscles and getting injury is much lesser as well. Now as the song progresses, you can see that her left hand and her right wrist continues with that angle, the flex angle. So okay, now another thing that I observe as the song progresses is that her right thighs start to actually get raised up. What that signifies is that her bass guitar is actually slowly slide down. Okay, and she's trying her best to use her right thigh to actually support it and prevent it from sliding down. So one thing that musicians should think about is that you should always ensure that your instrument is not hindering you, and that you're not actually thinking about the instrument flying off you, because that's the last thing you want to do. Okay, so the best way for her to actually prevent that from happening is to actually have a strap on, even though it might not look very good or it might be quite uncomfortable sometimes, but it's something that you need to experiment with. So if you put a strap on and it's fitted well and it's close to you, then and it's also at the right angle, a lot of these hand, wrists, postures, as well as your back postures and the way you play will improve dramatically. And there's a bit of experimentation going on. You won't get it right the first time, but what you can do is you can slowly experiment and see what works for you. Right, so that's the end of the song, and that's the end of my analysis for Anna Santina's playing. I mean, overall, she's okay. I think if she could correct some of her risks as well, her bass guitar angle, I think that will improve her posture much better. Obviously, I don't know Anna, and therefore I don't know that if she's experiencing any injuries. It may be that she doesn't, but it, again, as I said before, it's not about you correcting just because you have an injury, but rather is to prevent you from having an injury and prolonging your enjoyment and career as a musician. So that's the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you enjoyed that, do remember to subscribe and also to put down a comment on what you'd like to see for future videos. And this is Chee-Wee signing out here. I hope you have a nice day. Bye.